Hey, so this thing I'm passionate about is ableism towards intellectually disabled people. Um, the question I'm asking is, how can the majority be convinced to try to destigmatize intellectual disabilities, which happens to be the most heavily stigmatized and marginalized group in all of society? Key terms that will, whatever, microaggression, normalization, othering, glorification, stereotyping, ableism, eugenics, internalization. So, microaggression, an example of that in this topic of ableism towards intellectually disabled people would be complimenting people for being intelligent, which is extremely common. And it implies that being unintelligent is less admirable. People will try to sugarcoat it by saying everyone has different strengths, but that doesn't justify it. For one, intellectual disabilities can prevent people from doing a lot of things that society considers admirable. And if two people were exactly the same for their intelligence, these sugarcoaters, based on their compliments, would have to prefer the more intelligent one, which is unjustifiable. It's an unearned benefit. People seem to have a hard time finding things to compliment intellectually disabled people on, whereas they can normally come up with nice things to say about someone with autism. But, like, they usually are people are condescending to autistic people, but like they seem especially condescending to intellectually disabled people. Like they don't know how to say anything that isn't condescending, because they really do just see those people as subhuman. Um, Perhaps the most normalized form of ableism towards intellectually disabled people, ableism in general, and even bigotry in general, I would say, is the use of words like stupid, idiot, moron, imbecile. They're so ingrained in the English language that hardly anyone, including some disability activists, even think about the insinuations. On the rare occasion that someone is called out, they will either get angry or say they were referring to ignorance. Like, oh no, I'm using stupid to mean ignorant, not admitting that they likely associate ignorance with cognitive abilities. Other circumstances, one may defend someone by saying they're not. They'll defend them by saying, "Oh, this person might not be stupid; they might just be ignorant," which implies that they do consider stupid a disability and not just ignorance, and that they, for some reason, think that a disability is more contemptible than ignorance, which, you know, is really is bad. those those who use the words dumb and stupid when expressing frustration, which is most English speakers, most people say that, also use them to describe people who struggle with things like puzzle solving, reading comprehension, and the fact that they're using those words to describe things they hate and that group of people implies a dislike of that group of people. And even if some people don't realize that they're doing it because it's just so normalized, it still perpetuates hate. And yeah, I like, people will say what really matters is intentions, but like, even if you're not intending to perpetuate hate, you can still perpetuate it. And someone who calls out ableism will almost always get more backlash than whoever they're calling out. Like, the only place that won't happen is like a disability forum on the internet, but I've even seen some of those that have people defending, like, someone who says something ableist. Because, like, saying the world would be better without disability, that's considered a controversial statement. Like, most people wouldn't jump down someone's throat for saying that when they really should. It should be considered an objectively false statement. And the person who calls them out for saying that will be told to calm down. Like, people have different opinions. You don't have to, angry at him for. But even though it's objectively wrong to say that the world would be better without disability, it's very devaluing to people with disabilities. But if someone calls out someone for a more recognized form of bigotry like racism, then they'll be backed up, and the person who's being racist will, get torn apart. Even if they're being racist towards white people, which isn't always taken as seriously. Because, they're not really, like, they're a privileged group. So, but, like, even if you do say something racist towards white people, someone will call you out, and people will agree with them for, but insults directed at intellectual disabilities are not considered worth getting upset over because they're so normalized. Like, if someone says the N-word, they'll get, crucified righteously. Not literally crucified, but if someone says the R-word, they'll be ignored, usually. And if they are called out, they'll be defended. Even if it is, like, sometimes that even happens in disability forums, when it's not even an intellectually disabled person using the word, when it's someone with another disability using it. So, othering. People on social media who oversimplify mental health and give advice to cure depression, giving advice like, take showers, take a walk, read a book. These are all things that can be prevented by a disability. And if you bring up disabilities, they'll say that's a separate discussion, accidentally admitting that they don't see disabled people as real members of society. Like, they shouldn't have to be a separate discussion. They should be in the main discussion. And that separate discussion never even happens. They just say that to move on. And even, like, so, to bring it back to intellectual disabilities specifically, people with physical disabilities will sometimes say, why does society treat us like we're mentally disabled? Even though mentally disabled people shouldn't be treated that way either. And autistic people will sometimes say, why do people think we're intellectually disabled? But that shouldn't be considered contemptible either. Like, a lot of people with certain disabilities seem to not like being compared to people with other disabilities, not just because it's inaccurate, but because they look down on those people. A lot of contemptible traits, like actual contemptible traits, will be associated with low intelligence. If someone's racist, someone will be like, oh, such a low IQ take. Like, everything from racism to egotism to willful ignorance, it is blamed on inferior intellect. And most people use it as a way to avoid having to look critically at what causes these issues. They also don't want to face the fact that the average person could possess those traits because they don't want to feel like they belong in that group of people that they hate. They don't want to feel like they belong in the same group as the racist people. So by saying that they're low IQ, they get to, disassociate with those people. even other marginalized group, like short men, will blame heightism on low IQ, which is like how society will blame their height on their sometimes bad attitude, which is usually justified because they're being mistreated. But a lot of them, even though they're also marginalized, will blame it. Will call like the sugar coaters, the tall people who are saying, "Oh, just shower, bro." They'll say that they'll say that's a low IQ take. And this kind of talk teaches, kids that cognitive abilities and contemptible traits are correlated, and that they shouldn't be thought of that way, because it just makes people hate that group of people that does not deserve to be hated. And it, oddly enough, the word disability, when you say the word disability, it usually gets a worse reaction. It gets a different reaction than when you say, like if you say, "What do you have against low IQ people?" That won't have the same reaction as if you say, "What do you have against intellectually disabled people?" The word disability tends to catch people off guard because they're like, "Oh wait, am I being a jerk to disabled people?" But if you bring up intellectual disabilities to their saying low IQ, they'll say that's a separate discussion, like I said earlier with the ignorance thing, which again means that they don't see intellectually disabled people as equals. But some people will even shamelessly admit that they hate intellectually disabled people and likely face no consequences. Like, you can say, "Oh, intellectually disabled people are the lowest of the low in our society," and no one will even say anything. That they might internally be like, "Oh, that's a really messed up thing to say," but no one will call them out, which is not what would happen if they said something racist. Someone would call them out. So, and glorification of intelligence. So intelligence isn't one thing. It's a bunch of things that aren't always correlated, but a lot of people define intelligence as cognitive abilities or associate it with cognitive abilities. And when people talk about shallowness, they'll list intelligence as something you should look for in a partner rather than height or looks, even though intelligence is also just an unearned benefit. It is an unchosen attribute, just like height or looks. So it should be on the list of things you should look for in a partner. And IQ is also talked about like an achievement. And most people don't even realize that it indicates anything other than cognitive abilities, which proves that they see cognitive abilities as the determinative of human value. Consequently, low IQ is used as an insult. And people with other disabilities like autism try to explain, like when they tend to, a lot of them get low IQ scores that don't reflect their cognitive abilities, and they'll try to explain that as not an indicator of intellectual disability, and that may be accurate, but it also devalues people who are intellectually disabled when they're trying to defend themselves by saying, "No, I'm not intellectually disabled." And when people make fun of bad spelling and grammar or use it to invalidate someone's point, dyslexic people will be like, "Dyslexic doesn't mean I'm stupid." But like, you shouldn't invalidate an intellectually disabled person's opinion either. So why are you using that to defend yourself? So ableism, I think, overall is the most normalized form of bigotry, being able to do something has always been the biggest compliment you could give someone. Being unable to do something's always been a bigger insult than choosing not to do something. Someone who tries and succeeds at something is more respected than someone who tries and fails at something. Society does value success over effort. And because so many abilities are determined by intelligence, intellectual disabilities, that makes intellectual disabilities naturally the most stigmatized one. Because so many things that are considered admirable in society aren't clearly apparent or just not present in intellectually disabled people. And those things shouldn't be considered admirable. So, eugenics, a lot of people only react negatively to eugenics talk when it's about race. But if you talk about eugenics in the context of disabilities, a lot of people, normal people, will agree with you and not see the issue with it. There are already laws allowing people to abort babies with Down syndrome for having Down syndrome. And I don't have a problem with abortion in general, but I do have a problem with aborting someone because they're disabled. Even if it is because you don't want them to deal with ableism, still you're not helping that group be more accepted by aborting them because they're disabled. They've already done it with Down syndrome, and they're trying to do the same with autism. And short men, like I mentioned earlier, they're a marginalized group. When they'll justifiably complain about babies being screened for height, they'll ask, why don't they screen for IQ instead? A lot of them have asked that, which blatantly implies that they see intellectually disabled people as expendable, despite also being victims of discrimination. And you would think that a marginalized group would recognize that. It's not as surprising when a privileged group says something like that, but as a marginalized group, it's really proves just how stigmatized that group of people is, that even another marginalized group would say that stuff about them. So if someone, I'll bring up the R word again, if someone on the internet gets called out for saying the R word, someone in the autism community, one person will usually disclose that they have autism and say, I give them permission, they can say the R word, I don't care. But just because the R word often gets used on autistic people, some autistic people think it's their word. It's not. It refers to intellectually disabled people. The autistic people don't have the right to reclaim it. If anyone has the right to reclaim it, it's the intellectually disabled people. And practically no one in the ID community wants to reclaim that word. Every time they're bringing it up, they're saying, please don't say the R word. So there's no reason to keep using it. It seems like some autistic people think they have more say in it than intellectually disabled people, because they don't think intellectually disabled people are capable of making a good judgment, which is, I shouldn't have to explain why that's wrong. So, one thing that allows this to continue is disabled people being ableist, being brainwashed into thinking society is right about them. They'll feel ashamed of their disabilities and respect people without those disabilities. And intellectual disabilities, already being the most stigmatized, are especially likely to lead to internalized ableism. So, when even disabled people hate disabled people, it can be hard to argue in favor of them. And a lot of other disabilities are wrongly associated with intellectual disabilities. making the stigmatization even more extreme for intellectual disabilities. This one disability has the stigma of every disability. Well, I've said everything, I think.